Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We are so happy that you're joining us for season. What are we going on to now? Like, we're almost at season 3. We've been rocking and rolling together. You've been with us 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every single Wednesday with our legal experts, of which we have joining us today Mr. Royce Russell Esquire and Senor Edward Picharo.
Hello.
So before we get started, you all want to greet the family?
Sure, that sounds great. Why don't you lead it off, Ed?
Oh, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Todo mi gente, ¿cómo están? Welcome to today's show. Glad to have you. As usual, I'm sure you'll find the information educational as well as fulfilling. So stay tuned.
And you know, this is Royce Russell. And as much as we talk about COVID protocol, I know my brother's fully vaccinated. That's
right.
Why we are less than 6 feet within distance of one another. And look, we make it a priority to talk about it on our show. And,
right.
We got to follow through the procedures and protocol. So we got 2 V's here for victory. And we're going to rock and roll today. So thank you for joining us for another segment.
Absolutely. And hey, Rich. Yeah, not those two together. Exactly. Pray for me, Richard. It's going to be a long show. No, we're going to have a great time. We have a lot
you see how quick she is on the edit. She just put Ed Machado and Royce Russell. I didn't even see
I didn't even see that. When she did that,
that's what I do, right? So,
straight. I didn't even see like the type,
Can't make it a biggest.
Let me find out you got some illegal workers there or something. We got to figure this out. You know what I mean?
Anyway, family, let's get started with the show. Don't hate on the producing skills. So we really, thanks, Rich. I got you in my corner out there. So we always open up the show talking about anyone who has transitioned to become one of our ancestors. And I was just telling Mr. Russell behind in the green room about this young man that 23 years old died of natural causes, which was really a shocker because, we definitely don't expect people to pass away at all. But when they're young, it hits you kind of different. And this young man he was the youngest on record to interview our 44th president, Obama. And I'm going to just share this little post and we're going to play a little clip from him because he was just very charismatic. It went all over the place. I believe he was only 9 or 8 years old when he actually interviewed the president. And it was wonderful just to see this article highlight his life at such a young age. Now, one of our ancestors. So I'm going to play a little clip.
Most important thing young people can do, I think, is to do well in school, but also when they've got some spare time, try to help out other people, maybe through your church or through your religious community or out in the neighborhood, helping an elderly person carry their grocery bags in, or being.
I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit.
Also really helpful to the country.
Everybody knows that you love basketball. I think it would be cool to have a president that can dunk. Can you dunk?
Not anymore. I used to be young, but I'm almost 50 now, so your legs are the first thing to go.
My buddy Dwayne Wade promised me if you gave me the interview, he would play in a one-on-one basketball game, but he's not sure if he would let you score. Would you be willing to play in a one-on-one basketball game?
I would play Dwayne Wade, and Dwayne was here. I'm sorry to hear that he was trash talking about his game. I got to admit, though, Dwayne Wade's a little bit better at basketball than I am. So I might rather have him on my team playing against somebody else than playing against him.
What is it like being the president of the United States?
Well, it's very exciting. It's a lot of work, and there are times where you get a little worn down, but every day you have the possibility, the ability of helping other people, and if you can do that, then that's a great thing.
In my time poking, I have seen a lot of shooters and fights. What are you going to do about violence and to keep me safe?
Well, I think we have to make sure that all schools have the resources to keep kids safe, but it's also important that parents and community members participate in training their young people to resolve arguments and disagreements without resort to violence. And too many of our young people, when they get frustrated or angry at each other, they start acting out in violence, and we need to make sure that we are teaching young people to deal with the issues that they may have in a better way.
So I think I can pause there because we can definitely get caught up in this interview. But I thought that was appropriate where the legal meets the cultural, and he asked the important questions. I mean, basketball. I mean, hello, can you take Dwayne Wade out, Mr. President? It's just so innocent. All of his repertoire of work at such a young age. And he is now at 23 with our other ancestors. So our condolences go out to his family and friends and everyone who enjoyed seeing this young reporter. So just wanted to kick off the show with paying homage to him and to anyone else that we might not know about that is now with the ancestors, that their work continues through the lives that we live. And I just thought that was adorable. As a mother of two boys, I'm always touched when I see these stories of young men growing into great men. And I can only imagine the shock at 23. I mean, that hits close to home. My oldest son will be 24 tomorrow. So it hit me different when I read that story. I'm like, whoa. But
well, the amazing thing is that he, given what he was able to do in his short life, which involved interviewing the president, that he's going to live in the hearts and minds of people for years to come, based on that wonderful interview. So, God bless him and his family. May he rest in power.
And you can tell that he was before his time, because even in some of the questions, and we know probably some of the questions might have been choreographed, but the questions that he talked about in relation to sports, he hit an area that I think is universal to everyone, right? And so when you talk sports, it's like music is universal. And so when you're doing an interview at that level of that magnitude, you want to make sure that you hit the audience on a universal platform. So my condolences to his family. I'm sure he's up there interviewing a lot of other people like Michael Kay and many other people that we have seen passed on to what we call chapter invisible for Brothers in Kappa Alpha Psi. But I'm sure he's up there doing his interviews all day and all night.
Absolutely. And he also got to interview Oprah, Bishop Jakes, a lot of notables. So, yeah, congratulations to him and the legacy he leaves. Now on to the news, right? And the news is not always the nice news that we try to talk and work through. But the Justice Department has come down with some information recently that our legal experts are going to enlighten us a little bit more on. We've talked about it here on this show about what it means with the no-knock warrants and entries and chokeholds. So this is interesting that the Justice Department announces no-knock entries, a ban on no-knock entries and chokeholds. So what does this really mean?
Well, one of the things I would like to look at is, number one, is the title of the article. Justice Department announces ban on no-knock entries and chokeholds. And if we could stay right there for a minute, because that's important. I want to make sure our viewers understand. It says the Justice Department announces no-knock entries and chokeholds, right? So what does it mean when the Justice Department makes that announcement? The Justice Department is only speaking to federal agencies. That should be a light bulb in your head. Something should click on. Federal and state is separate. If you can imagine going to college and applying for loans, you have federal loans and you have state loans. Two different places where you can get resources, two different rules and regulations. So when you see Justice Department announces ban on no-knock entries and chokeholds, you might be in a state that doesn't apply. So before you get your party hat and your whistleblowers, you got to kind of know, well, what state am I in? I'm living in, I reside in, and does that apply to me? Because that's a federal stand. So that means FBI, DEA, the U.S. Marshals. That does not mean local police, state police, troopers. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on who it applies to, what agencies. Yes, it's a step moving forward, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that critical point, because our viewers need to know the distinction.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's the Department of Justice only has jurisdiction over federal law enforcement and is thus announcing this ban. It is a game of inches, no doubt. You know, it's a step in the right direction, of course. But, you know, still in all, it's just a federal, and overwhelmingly the interplay and the contact that most people have with law enforcement is their local law enforcement, be the village, the city, or the state. It's usually local, and that's where most of the time you see, you know, these tragedies. With respect to the no knock, that speaks to directly to what happened in the Breonna Taylor case, and the fact that there was no announcement before entry, and that led to this, you know, a terrible tragedy, and has in other cases. So, you know, that on the federal level, refreshingly has changed. You know, so hopefully, you know, it results in less deaths or no deaths that are like what occurred in the Breonna Taylor case. And then you got the chokeholds, of course, officers restraining folks and, you know, killing them in the process, you know, and that's been an issue of debate for a very long time, even especially here in New York, going back to Anthony Baez and you know, and these deaths of people being choked. You know, I would say that Eric Garner was, you know, definitely a choking incident, you know, and, you know, from what I recall, attempts at getting those chokeholds banned have been extremely tough, because then you have local law enforcement saying, oh, we can't have our hands tied when it comes time to restraining a dangerous suspect and the like. You know, hopefully what happens is on this federal level, they can show the rest of the country that you can achieve the purpose of law enforcement without necessarily using these chokeholds, which are extremely dangerous, you know, and so hopefully that'll lead to examples, standardization, training that goes along with it, that then ends up spreading across the country and becomes the standard. Man, I'm hoping to see the day when the DOJ also starts limiting their funding or conditioning their funding of law enforcement on the adoption of these standards.
Look, let me take off the lens. Let me put on the right lens, because I don't know what lens he's looking through. He's looking way into the future. I mean, like, let's get back to the future. Let's come back to the present. And let me just go over some of the things that you said, Ed, from a different perspective. One, as you said, this is federal, and I, you know, led off with that. And so the Department of Justice has basically said that their mission is to build trust and confidence back in the people we serve. Now, that may be letters on words on a piece of paper, but it does speak volumes that the highest law enforcement agencies with the S is saying that. The problem is that there really isn't a trickle down effect as immediate as we would like it, right? The separation between church and state and federal and state is really a bold line. And we could just see that when we talk about how we're going to do mask, no mask, banning whether or not you can come into a certain establishment, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. So you can see the complexities of that. And so you take something that is so instrumental, even though it's life-saving, such as COVID, wearing masks and getting a vaccine. People have different viewpoints as to what should happen. And we're talking about safety and accountability. That's what we're really talking about here. We're talking about safety and accountability, and it's important. One of the things I do want to point out, once again, the details. You know, that's what they hire lawyers for, to go into the details. And part of the detail is that understand this does not apply to the Department of Homeland Security. So what does that mean? If you have someone from the Department of Homeland Security that's effectuating an arrest, effectuating some deportation order, doing something on either a national or local scope, they do not have to abide by this ban. They're not in that group. That you should underline and circle and highlight.
Wow.
Also understand that with every rule, there's an exception. And so let me read you the exception, right? This is to no-knock warrants, and this is as into chokeholds. So just understand one of the exceptions, no knock. Let me just read it. No knock warrants where agent does not knock and announce their identity. We've seen that far too many times. We know what that looks like, right? And we usually see it on the state level. That's what it is. That's what a no knock is. And the rationale for that is that usually they are pursuing either someone that they want, so they want to surprise that person by way of arrest warrant, or they're pursuing some type of drugs, which are, you can either just toss them away. And so we have to have the element of surprise there. But it goes on to say no knock and announce their identity, right? So warrants where agent doesn't knock or announce their identity are prohibited. Prohibited. You want to stop there, put a period, and end the chapter. But Ed, they're never going to end the chapter, right? There's always has to be a but, a however, except. So let's drop the except in. You have that bomb, the boom. You got that sound effect that go boom. So now the except comes into the house and land the boom, except when an agent believes doing so will create a threat of physical violence to either himself or someone else. So you still have this judgment call that is left in the hands of people that, unfortunately, given our relationship and engagement with them, we don't necessarily trust. So you got to read it all the way through. This is where that critical thinking, comes in, and reading in between the line. And you don't have to have a JD to do that. You have to really understand that. And, they talk about how to obtain a no-knock warrant. And I think they flush it out even more. They said that the agent must get approval from both their law enforcement component and the federal prosecutor. So there used to be a time where agent can go straight to a judge. This is the investigation we have. We want to go into 665 Westchester Avenue and kick the door down. Now, what the Department of Justice said, no, we're going to have three lenses on that. The lens of the agent, either by way of their informant or their own personal knowledge. The lens of the judge, by way of their knowledge of what they see and what should, how much detail is necessary and facts are necessary to sign a no-knock warrant. And the federal prosecutor got to put a stamp on it. So after those three eyes, or those six eyes, or those three pair of eyes, kind of see what's going on, then you can have it. That is also an exception. So understand that for where there are rules are made to be broken, and where there are rules, there are always exceptions. But I applaud them for trying to have a single standard.
Yeah, I mean, I just simply applaud them for trying, and like I said, hopefully, I think the aim here is, from those who push for this, is to get some level of standardization going. And, because the federal government's funding of local law enforcement is huge. When you look at law enforcement budget around the country, especially in the big cities, New York City, Chicago, LA, and even the smaller municipalities, almost all federal funding from my time, working in government, usually that funding has some conditions attached to it. And so I'm thinking that, and I think I've heard some commentary already, that the hope is that at some point, they will say, well, listen, in order for you to get X type of funding, you have to be able to show that you've adopted these best practices, or these training methods, or these protocols and procedures. And hopefully that, comes to include, this type of paradigm, this ban on chokeholds, this ban on no knock except under certain circumstances, or what sometimes we refer to the law as exigent circumstances.
Well, and once again, I hope that heavy leverage is used, so we can have uniformity I mean, that's all people are asking for. They're really asking for, hey, look, tell me what the rules are. And the more uniform they are, the better I can understand it. But I don't want us to leave with the misunderstanding that chokeholds won't be used, because once again, there's always that except if the officer believes, and that is the defense that we can see coming down the line when these cases come up, except when. So
Yeah.
I don't want people to make the mistake that all of a sudden the Facebook, social media capturing of these bad actors and misconduct is going to go away, because, as we said here, most of those are state actors, state offenders. And so, therefore, like I said, in Texas compared to New York, may not happen. And there you have it.
Well, thank you both for once again sharing information on something that we talked about here on the show, and that people need to understand. Yes, we're pushing for uniformity. We could only hope, right, Senor Pajado, hope springs eternal, that this uniform will take, a spark in other areas that they can look at, the states and how they function. But we'll take it for now as a start. We know that accept continues to be worrisome, but we see that the pressure, and that's why the pressure needs to stay on about reform and what that reform looks like and how we can continue to advocate for the rights of others.
And let me just add, I hate to be Barry, the bearer of bad news, but we have to read. We have to allow ourselves to read enough so we can fully understand. And it is important to understand the accept, because when we see clients and they come in and they say they can't do A, B, and C, they being law enforcement, or if they're in a contract dispute, oh, he can't or she can't do that, or the company can't. No, if you don't fully read what's before you, you will be misled. And so I think it's important.
And I think something also to take a look at here too is that there's mention in there about these corroborative
restraints. Corroborative restraints.
Is that the same as what happened in George Floyd, where you had this pressing down? I'm not.
Well, here it is. I believe it is, Ed, but I'm not for sure, because once again, right, in this article and what we see, lack of definition, right? And so that's what we always ask people of color, of the brown and black community. We always ask for transparency. That's the cultural part that we bring into the show. We always ask for transparency. And if I have to dig for the transparent element, if I have to dig for what should be right out there, as they say, black and white, but it's all covered in gray, then we have a problem. So I would have liked for them to say, the carotid restraints, that means knee on neck. That means, hand pressing on throat. Something that goes beyond and what we all know is a chokehold, which usually means something like this. And that's what we look at. Something like this. I know I need a little ash away, but don't worry about that. Something like but when you don't have that and you leave it undefined, then you have what we call litigation, and then here we go.
And not to mention in Daniel Prude case,
the spit bag. That would be a carotid restraint, right?
Yeah,
right. That's right.
I'm not sure.
Exactly. Look, to the layperson, right? Yeah. To the layperson. I mean, that's why we have lawsuits, and that's why we have lawyers, and that's why we have litigation. But to the average person, if you say, and this is what we were talking about during the mayoral race, right? I had a problem with one of the candidates. They said, oh, we want to put a civilian in charge of being a commissioner for the precincts. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by civilian? Like, you mean a guy like me, a guy like you, a sister like you, Dr. Grant? And then you come to find out, oh, no, I'm a civilian. That means someone that retires, they can retire from the police department. Well, now tell me what you're playing with. You doing 3-card Monte. You're hiding the red piece. And so I don't want them to hide the red piece. I want to know for sure that you put a spit bag, as they call it. I didn't make the term. Put a spit bag over a person like Daniel Prude, and you have it so tight that it suffocates that individual and they die. How is that not a carotid restraint? How is it not? It is. So, but define it. and folks can say, you have to be tricky, and this is the legal part, so catch this, because the vine is coming. I want you to swing on it. That when you have definitions, when you have things defined, what is the lawyer going on the other side is going to say? Well, what happened here is not defined. So since it's not defined, that falls outside of the category, right? It doesn't apply. So now I'm giving to you straight, no chaser, from the legal minds that sit here together. We know how it goes down in the courtroom. Well, you said chokehold and carotid restraints is equivalent to knee spit bag. Well, this wasn't that. This was, and I'm making light of it, but I'm just trying to give an example. His head was caught in between the elevator door or something, or his head was caught in the car door, something. Oh, well, that's not in the definition of what we have here. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm making light of it, but we all know humor is the basis of reality.
No. And I think what you're pointing to quite basically is that at the end of the day, there just has to be this respect for human life, regardless of the person's background, their race, or whatever it is. I mean, it just appears that certain people of a certain background are being treated in inhumane ways that they shouldn't, that are leading to death and serious injury. And that's what really needs to change at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for breaking that down so that we can watch where it goes. Good afternoon, Kevin. Thank you for being here as well. So as we continue moving from what the federal government is doing with the ban on the no knock and chokeholds, we also have some more news when it comes to New York's parole reform. So, we've talked about this on the show as well, and there's a bill that is coming forth and just a lot of conversation on where we are with this. So let's get some insight on what's happening with New York's parole reform imperative and what this Manhattan DA and his likely successor are saying to urge Governor Hochul here in New York to sign this Less is More Act.
Well, I'm going to start off again because I always like to start off and looking at the title of things, right? And so when you start doing the critical thinking in the title, then you go on to some more, I guess, thought provocative, profound type of conversation, right? So New York parole reform imperative. What I want to say to that is no shit. We've been trying to, do that for a long time, but okay. The Manhattan DA and his likely successor urge government. Now, I want to pay, a lot of homage and sincerely apologize to brother, is it Briggs, right? Who's running for Alvin Bragg, because basically this is one of those headlines that kind of steals his thunder. Like, that was on his agenda. We all know that was a major element of his reform and still is. And so now we got this, the DA is likely successor. No, stop. You wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't on your plate. Brother Bragg brought that on the plate. That was Alvin's plate. And now all of a sudden, right. So we need to understand this. A brother of color, right? And why is that important? Less is more. Why is that important? Because we have this candidate for DA that is concerned with the brown and black community and concerned with things that easily take them actions, laws, violations, ordinance. They easily take them and remove them from the community, remove them from their family, remove them from being productive products of society, remove them from the mainstream after they have already served their time, done their punishment, paid their punitive time, and they want to get back into society. And we have all the rules and regulations based upon parole or probation that just makes it impossible.
Now, just for the audience to give some background and context, what we're specifically talking about here is you have an individual who served their time. They either or they're on probation. In either case, they're out in the community. They're under some supervision where they have certain obligations. They have to visit the PO every week or every couple of weeks. They have to maintain a job. They have to stay away from individuals who've been convicted or engaging in felony behavior or convicted felons, etc.
Clean urine.
Clean urines, all of that. So we're talking about scenarios where you have an individual, he has a job, he's working hard, he missed an appointment with the PO, maybe went to the appointment and the urine came back dirty or whatever, or neither one of those. Just some officer is saying that, hey, he's hanging out with so and so who's a convicted felon, even though the only proof they have is a photo of him standing next to this guy for maybe about 5 minutes because the guy was standing in front of the grocery store in the neighborhood.
Can I stop you right there? What's important with that is that, look, I know from the community I grew up in, and I know Ed's background, the community he grew up in. When we came back from college, when we came back from the basketball game or whatever it was, you had to walk through the projects, and you walk through the project and you say what's up to everybody.
Exactly.
Because there's no reason for you not to say what's up to everybody. As a career professional, practicing law over 20-something years, when I walk through the old neighborhood, any neighborhood, whether it's uptown Harlem, whether it's in the Bronx, and I see people I know, I say, what's up? What's going on? I know they're known felons, some of them, and some of them are not. They're just hardworking people, right? So how do we define associated with felons, right? And so if that's something that can get you violated and it has a very vague definition, it should be removed. Now, as Ed said, a little snapshot. So if I come to you, I give you a hug, I shake your hand, I say, what's going on? How's everything? And they tell me, oh yeah, I saw your mother come in and out of the building. She's A, B, and C. I'm keeping an eye on her because maybe you don't have the financial means to remove her from the environment that you grew up in because you're still working up the ladder, right? Hopefully that.
Or maybe she don't even want to move.
Maybe she I don't care.
Yeah,
right. I'm staying right here.
I've been living here for 30 years.
Because I can see the 2 train coming, and by the time the 2 train coming, get to my
I know Miss Mario. My man always has my fresh avocado.
There we go. And Shank is always downstairs looking out for me. They actually open up the door before I get there because they see Mrs. Russell coming up the hill. Right. So all those things. Right. And so here you come back to the community. You say, hey, what's up? How's everything? And you may have taken a plea where you're on probation. That means you never went to jail. You just have to live by these constraints for the next 5 years or 3 years. You get a second bite at the apple. But now you come by, you say, what's up to Ed, Ned, Fred, or what have you, and they have a felony record, and now a parole officer or probation officer is plucking you off the street. And I'll let you go on that, but let me just say something. The governor is supposed to be the justice reformer, wants to make sure that there's unnecessary incarceration and understand the racial impact and the disparities that happen in these type of judgments. And so it's great that we might deal away with or get rid of, the missing appointment violations with a parole officer or probation officer, failing to report. That is an issue. I wouldn't say that that's as clean cut. There are scenarios where people honestly fail to report, and there are scenarios where people just, I'm not going to report. But here's the kicker. To change your address, that means you coming at me because I moved from building 665 to building 645, or I moved from Harlem to the Bronx. It's not like I moved out of state. Testing positive for drugs. We could talk about that. There's some debate on that. Late curfew, come on. Is that what we pulling people out?
And one of the big things here is just to kind of also give you some more background. This law, this act, this legislation was passed by the Assembly and the Senate at the end of the regular session around July, I believe it ended. And so now the governor has to sign it, of course. And Cuomo didn't sign it, and so they're urging now Governor Hochul to sign it. So there's a possibility sometimes you will have legislation that's passed in both houses, and the governor, who has the power to veto, right? And then the legislature would have to go back and defeat that veto, I believe, with a 2/3 vote. But in any event, aside from those technicalities, they're urging Hochul to sign it. There are situations where maybe the governor may say, well, listen, I want you to tweak these little parts of the legislation, go back, and I'll sign it then. And that may be what's going on. I'm not exactly 100% sure. The good thing about this legislation is it seems to create quicker turnaround time for these violations hearings, which has been a real problem. And situations where the person, if the reason for the person being violated, term violated, being incarcerated based on a probation or parole violation, if it's, say, a misdemeanor or a minor violation, and the judge has given that person bail and said, or given them what they call ROR on that, then it talks about that also being the case with respect to the hold and allowing that person to appear at a violation hearing later on, if there is one, regarding this particular violation and whether they should be sent back to do the rest of their time. There are quicker turnaround times on that, because I'm sure, Royce, like you, have had clients who they're out on the new case, but they're still incarcerated on this
violation,
you know?
right.
And there's no hearing upcoming, and you're sitting there, and the actual crime that they quote unquote committed that has them on a hold is like relatively minor. I mean, it's something that they wouldn't otherwise be incarcerated for.
Even if it's a crime. Even if it's a crime, right? It may not even be a crime, right? You brought up the misdemeanor. It may be a violation. He may have several he or she may have several violations of showing up or not showing up or coming upstairs late or what have you. All good, trains late, whatever. No dirty urine. Just have one of this, and then this situation occurs. And on top of that, to add some numbers to what you were saying, that on average, it takes 63 days to resolve these things. That's on average. So that means there are times where people are incarcerated for a longer period of time. And Ed knows this, and we'll share this with others that are out there. Sometimes what happens is that, let's say the rule says, and we're going to do a whole show on this, because this is just a little bit. This is just a little taste, because the whole show, the legislation, we want to break it down, right? Let's just say you have a hearing in 90 days for this violation. And I believe that's the law, so we don't have to say, let's just say, but 90 days. And so since we have those 90 days, whether it is malicious, punitive, or whether it's just sheer volume, now a person like me who's violated because, and that means sent back to jail, so we understand violated, was released on his own recognizance, ROR, on another case, but has this violation, is sent to jail. Let's just say probation or parole decides that we're going to have this hearing on the 80th day of the 90 days that I have to have this hearing. What do you think? What's the practical of a person 9 times out of 10? Then look, it's probably going to get resolved, and it'll get resolved something like this. Yeah, you can have your hearing, and we can find you guilty, and possibly some other bad things may happen to you. That means you do a 2-year stint or whatever time is on balance, or you've been in for 80 days. Can we just call it a day and you just bounce out?
That speaks to so much about reform and just looking at how you set folks up for failure. Do you really want them to succeed? Do you want them to be rehabilitated? Do you want them to really enter back into society and be productive members? So yeah, we talked a lot about probation, and there's more to break down the law. So we might have to revisit this again, where the legal meets the cultural, because of all of the disparity in how these things are handled. We see a whole lot of these stories where it could have been just as innocent as you described it, someone that gets hauled back off to jail because you're setting them up.
And the beautiful thing is, I believe there's language in there also about expanding the factors that can be considered by the hearing officer in terms of the person's overall performance while on probation and parole, and what they've been doing, and in terms of keeping a job or doing a bunch of other good things that outweigh this violation or the reason for the hold. So
yeah,
I'm certainly with the proponents in terms of hoping it gets passed, and hopefully it gets signed into law, and it's being backed by prosecutors as well as defense attorneys, because I think it creates a more efficient system. There are so many individuals that right now are incarcerated on these holds when they really shouldn't be, and even the judge, when they grant them bail or grant them or agree that, look, listen, I'm not going to continue to hold this person off of that right there. The hold part, if the intention is for the person to be released, then it should match. It shouldn't be an
Right.
issue where, if I'm being violated off of that so-called crime that I just committed, that I should continue to stay in there because my PO decides, hey, you know what, a violation is a violation,
And the cynical part of me, I'm sorry, Dr. Grant, there's two things I will point out. One, to add numbers, right? I am an advocate that numbers could lie, right? Depending upon, where they come from. And you have to look at it like, all those who have kids, black and brown kids that are going to college or about to go to college, and you do this recruiting of what school your kids should attend, and you hear numbers like all our graduates, 95% of our graduates have jobs when they leave. Well, now you have to ask yourself, is that 95% of the black students have jobs, or is it just 95% of the students? So that's how critical I am with any subject matter that I touch. And so using that same set of lens and putting on that same hat, we have to realize that black and brown people are 12 times likely to be incarcerated because these type of violations than white folks. Now, my cynical hat says, and you could jump in here, Dr. Grant, my cynical hat says, also, we know that it saved the city money. Haha, it will save the city money. I don't know which one is the motivation, but we got to throw that in there.
Well, we'll push a pin on that one. Will it save the city money? Maybe, but let's just save lives. And I just want to go back to what Kevin shared, that the bill should be called the Corey Wise bill, because he went to the board 3 times and professed his innocence. And if he had broken down and admitted to the attacks on the women in Central Park, the entire case would have made a turn for the worse. So interesting. And let's keep it moving with the stories of the day, because this directly affects what else is in the news. That has been quite a stir on Rikers Island. We know that there is the closure that is still underway in these borough-based jails. But right now, we have deaths, exhausted guards, rampant violence. Why is Rikers Island in crisis? A number of recent deaths have prompted questions about the notorious New York City jail complex. So this is an interesting New York Times article on what we see happening in real time, what New York City mayor is saying, and what he is trying to also push towards Governor Hochul. So I would love to get both of you to weigh in on this one.
But make sure that you just put the title back up, because I always start with titles. Get it.
Okay. You got 10 deaths, exhausted guards, rampant violence. Why Rikers is in crisis. I'm going to focus in on the exhausted guards part, because this has now become an issue of employee availability. What do I mean by employee availability? Certain people are claiming, the mayor, in fact, is claiming that because guards aren't showing up for work, that this is the reason why this is all occurring. And the head of the correctional officers union is like, is really upset about this, because apparently it appears that in the rules and regulations in terms of the correction officers and the collective bargaining agreement, they are allowed to not report or call out sick, if you will, up to, I guess, a certain amount of days without having to provide a note from a doctor or medical documentation as to the reason for the absence. And so now, they're looking at it because of the numbers. They're trying to say, oh, this is systematic. These folks are not really booking off because they're sick. They're just not showing up because they don't want to, or the job is hard. And, and now all of a sudden de Blasio makes this announcement, making it a requirement that anybody that books off now needs to bring a doctor's note. Now, that's a major change in the terms and conditions of employment. And I would imagine that the Correctional Officers Union is going to file something with the New York State Public Employment Relations Board regarding this unilateral change in the terms and conditions of employment, because it looks like the city is trying to change the terms of the contract that it struck between themselves and the union as to when these officers need to provide a reason, what they don't. So,
how appropriate do they try to sneak this in the time of COVID, right? So you have the time of COVID, all hands on deck, right? I'm sorry, guys. This is a state of an emergency. We got COVID. You know, if you don't have a doctor's note that says that you have COVID too, or you have something that's wrong with you, you got to show up, right? So now you already impeding and taking away my rights as an employee under the guise of COVID. Now, when things are kind of resetting itself, you don't want to push back the line. You want the line to stay where it is. So now you have this 10 deaths or exhaustion, and that is all because you're not allowing for the relief to happen under this, this state of emergency. Let's just call it a COVID blanket. You gotta be there. And we're living in a time that we're talking about mental health, right? That's a big, big thing. Should be, should always, should never have been small in and of itself. But how can you say with, irrespective of anything, you still have to show up? Mental health is so important. And you know how hard it is to get a doctor's appointment? Doctors still are not seeing people regularly. There is a bunch of hurdles, or there are a bunch of hurdles that are happening here that is almost impossible for the employee to jump through to say that this is legit. This is legitimate.
And the officers union, they're saying, like, listen, we need to hire more. We need to hire more guards. Of course, you got the folks on the other side claiming, well, your staff is just as large as others of the same size in other parts of the country. At the end of the day, this is just all just really, really unfortunate. It's sad because at the beginning, I guess, at the beginning of the de Blasio administration, the real discussion was closing down Rikers altogether. And now we're talking about additional staffing and stuff. I did see some articles or some Instagram posts by an individual who I believe is currently incarcerated in there, who happens to be a rapper, talking about some of the inmates having to take on staffing duties or duties involving helping other inmates get to the point at which they can be transported to their court hearings. It's an absolute mess.
And not only that, they're not really speaking to the real issue of overcrowdedness. I mean, like go back to the title. That is nowhere in there. Is why it's overcrowded. Mm-hmm. You know that. Like, let's start from there. At least announce that and set the record straight.
But even with the overcrowding and all of that, the fact that people are taking their lives, suicide, the gangs are rampant. It's just so many layers to what's wrong with Rikers. And I know the movement to break it out into the borough-based jails and to be able to do things differently is still going to require a certain level of reworking and restructuring so that it is not overcrowded. So we don't have people that are sitting waiting, like this mother that's quoted in the article, that her 25-year-old is being held while he awaits trial on assault and grand larceny charges, and she doesn't want to see her child die in jail. So can you imagine all of the other family members that are feeling the same way because this crisis is continuing to get worse? And we're still in the middle of COVID. So there's so many layers of danger that are happening at this time. And, we don't want this to be just a political story because there are people's lives that are attached. So when the mayor and other people are talking about it, I always say, well, what's really happening to the lives of those inmates, some of them who have not been proven guilty?
And that's an excellent point, because at the end of the day, Rikers is supposed to be a jail. It's supposed to be a holding facility for those awaiting trial. Transitional facility. But yet, it over the years, it's turned into an actual prison where people are in there for inordinate periods of time in a temporary holding facility that's not designed for that length of stay, quite frankly. You've had individuals who have gone ahead and said, man, I'll plead. I just need to get upstate. We've heard that time and time again. I can't take it.
I just need to get up out of here.
I just need to get up out of here, because that's the real problem at the end of the day. The abuse of the speedy trial process, right? You know, the multiple adjournments. I mean, it's it's frightening.
And then if you add some more color to it, right? You have this situation. You know that overcrowdedness has something to do with it. You know economics have something to do with it. Now you're just going to blame the employee in reference to their due diligence and going in. Look, if any job, that is one of the toughest jobs to do, hands down, no two ways about it. And then somebody, if you read this article, either it's in this article, I know I heard it on the news, somebody in their splendor of genius and their ultimate element of, can you please put the article down, because I want to make sure everybody please see the full, in the ultimate intelligent moment that they had, thought of the great idea. This is a great idea right there. Thought of the great idea of saying, you know what? Let's have cops come in there and take up the slack. Let's have police come in there. Let the police department come into the prisons. And so when you call out sick, Dr. Grant, Officer Rodriguez is going to come in there and take your place. Isn't that brilliant?
From precinct 11 or whatever.
Isn't that brilliant?
God knows where. Who has been trained to deal with actual inmates.
We're just going to take them right there from the street and just put them in. Like, you don't even have, crisis intervention training. You haven't even gotten that down right. And now you're going to send them into, crisis intervention training. That's someone that's out in society that you need to have special training. We're fighting for that for civilians. So you're going to take that and you're going to multiply that by 12 and then some, and you're going to send that police officer right into the prisons. And lo and behold, let me just tell you one thing. And it only needs to happen one time. Police officer Rodriguez goes into that prison. He think he's doing his duty. And the guy that he arrested, he has no idea that he arrested this guy. He don't forgot this is guy arrestee number 345 in a long year of 365 days in a year. He don't remember that dude. But guess what? Anybody that does time, they remember how they got caught to do time. And they remember the day that they walk in, and I've seen it on movies, but I know it to be true, and the day that they leave. So if they bump into police officer Rodriguez in that environment, is it on and popping? For those who don't know, that means that there's going to be a problem out there.
Okay? It's where the legal meets the cultural.
and not only this, I'll be interesting in the coming days to see what the PBA has to say about this in terms of bargaining unit and work. You know what I mean? Because
so can you imagine? They're like, you're going to try to stress us out to go do something else?
Yeah, move us from from the jobs we're supposed to be doing or assigned to now this. So it's going to be interesting because what the discussion was, if I recall, was that something about they're going to take the guards who normally work in the courts or do the transportation and move them onto the island. And
they don't even realize that that's an incentive. Guys work hard to be the transport person, right? Like that's the easy gig. Seniority within correctional officers. Like, you know what? I'm in with these guys all the time. I finally reached the point that I just got to drive the bus to and from court and take a head count. And now you take it. That's almost like taking the placard from an assistant district attorney, or not allowing the guy or the person that works for the MTA to maybe get on the trains for free. It's like, come on, man. Like, what you doing? Like, you leaving me with no option but to say, I'm out. I'm going into another world, another phase.
So this is a long way of saying it appears that the mayor seems to be trying to bypass having to really, really sit down with the correctional officers union and say, listen, we got to find a solution to this because, people are dying, staff is getting injured. And instead of me saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, I'm the mayor. You have to sit down and have, a good
conversation.
Yeah.
And that's straight. That he took that straight from the mayor's voice box. Like, I'm the mayor. You gotta do that. That's straight from the
We're gonna leave on a hopeful note. This is a story as we come to the top of the hour that I shared on another program that I'm a part of, and it's local people in Minneapolis interrupting violence with one lawn chair at a time. What they decided to do was just find out from the precinct where the hot spots were in their community. They started a 21 Days of Peace event, and basically the numbers have gone down with violence interruption. So it's possible to get around what we see happening and not have a situation like a Rikers with community people. These are just elders, parents, grandparents, clergy, community leaders that just took a chair, like you see in this photo, and just sat down. Sat down because then those in the community recognize their faces. They can have conversations with them, and they were able to see a reduction in crime. And even over in Nashville down to Baltimore, I just wanted to share this on the Good News Network. You can, look it up and see what they're doing. But we want to be hopeful that this show and the information that our legal experts give can help you figure out, what do you want to do? How are you going to be helpful in changing these narratives? I mean, these are people's lives. Yes, people make bad choices, bad decisions. We don't want danger in our communities, but there also needs to be some humanity to how we deal with each person who is touched by the criminal justice system. So thank you both for sharing your insight today, and let you give your final comments and thoughts on what we shared as we close and prepare for what else comes in the news next week, same time, same place.
Just for the audience, that article right there referring to these violence interrupters that exists here in New York as well, with the Cure Violence programming that is, quote unquote, supported by the mayor's office, credible messengers in the community, usually individuals who have credibility with those who are at the tipping point of the violence, and there are a lot of them in the community. You can.
You got Good Shepherds has the Brags program, BRAG2, right? Life Camp. So we have We Build the Block. Hey, look, we talked about that in the other episode.
No, yeah. And then we also have programs right now also where they're, paying young people to. There's a particular program, and I guess we could talk about that in terms of paying certain young people to, go to school and get jobs versus that, because there's also an argument that some of this is triggered by some of the economic circumstances that exist in the community. So, definitely, and a lot of this programming, one of the biggest models for this stuff is in the city of Chicago. Of course, the other side of this stuff that needs to be talked about is how law enforcement has a particular issue with these programs, because they don't like the idea that some of these violence interrupters are individuals in the community
actually getting paid,
or rather have information that they don't have.
That's right.
About what's about to go down, because they really want to be
in the mix.
So they want to be in control of this.
No, they want to be in the mix in a way that is going to be. It's not going to be to the benefit of the community. Yes and no, right? It's going to be a benefit to the community, because then the violence or the incident may not occur, but it's not really going to serve the community, because the way you go about doing it only separates and divides and creates an avenue for there to be no communication, not even miscommunication, just no communication. And I'd rather tell Brother Ed that something's going to go down, and maybe he could intercede, than tell police officer, McCarthy, who really is going to handle it so differently.
Well, I think there's room for us to bring on some special guests from these organizations and the local ones. Erica Ford is here in my community and doing a great job with Life Camp, Good Shepherd. Both of you have done some work with, and We Build a Block. So that's a future show. And if you all are interested in that, let us know, because I think it's important to see the other side, that it's not just defund the police, that we have organizations that are performing as violence interrupters. They're putting their life on the line. They have no backup. They're putting their life on the line each and every day when they're out on the street, where they're trying to de-escalate situations. So more to come from Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We thank you so much for being a part of the show and being a part of the dialogue. Rich, Kevin, those who catch the replay, #replay, you can let us know that you're listening in. And we'll be back again next week, same time, same place, by the grace of God, with information that you can utilize that just not only makes you feel some kind of way, but gives you the ability to act with legal experts, where you can call Mr. Russell, you can call Mr. Pichardo. Their law offices are listed here as it's scrolling by, the law office of edwardpichardo.com or roycerussellesquire.com. If you have additional questions or someone in your family is being affected by any of the storylines that we have shared. So thank you once again, and we'll be back again soon. Stay safe and stay well.